if I could have a motion from one of you, please, to allow Commissioner Justice to attend the meeting by phone.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And the action item is to approve the April 4th minutes of our legislative committee. May I have a motion, please?
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. And now we are on the information item, which is the interlocal agreement, I guess, Brad, that we're working on with T-BARTA in an effort for PSTA to assist with financial oversight.
Yes, and Chair Long and the rest of the committee, if we could do that, I apologize for not putting it on the agenda, but since we do have Harry on the phone and maybe Steve, and maybe since they're going to give us a federal
update. Do you want to do
update.
that one first?
Yeah, do that.
Is that all right, Debbie?
Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah. Harry, do you want to start off with the federal report, please?
Sure. I think we updated you prior. The House Appropriations Committee, the House and Senate are both actually steaming along on the appropriations front this year, unlike previous years. The House Appropriations Committee last month approved the Transportation Appropriations Bill and continues to provide strong increases in funding for a variety of transportation programs, including the Federal Transit Administration. They included $13.6 billion for the FTA in their bill, which is a $1.1 billion increase over the FAST Act authorization. And they continue to support the CIG program with $2.6 billion in investment, $350 million for the bus and bus facilities, which is important to you, and $50 million again for the Low-No grant program. So, you know, there will continue to be strong investment, which should be helpful as you continue work on the BRT project. The Senate Appropriations Committee, the Subcommittee on Transportation, yesterday approved their appropriations bill at basically the same levels as the House. The full committee will take that bill up on Thursday, tomorrow. And the House and Senate are both trying to get these bills onto the floor and through the House and the Senate before the end of the month. So there's a good opportunity or possibility that these bills could be signed into law before the fiscal year begins on October 1st, which would be a real departure from the past couple of years. I don't know, Steve, I just think I heard Steve dial in maybe. Yeah, no, I'm on. Sorry, I was a minute late.
Good morning, Steve. Thank you for joining us.
Morning. Well, now correct me on everything I said that was wrong.
No, everything that Harry said was right. And the best news of all, let me go back to 30,000 feet for a second. The best news of all is Congress again has shown that, and maybe Harry said this, but has shown that they are rejecting President Trump's desire to kill the Capital Investment Grant program. So the long-term future for the program looks good, and that's great for the Central Avenue BRT and the other projects in the Bay Area.
Excellent.
The other thing that, Steve, I think I know in the Senate bill, I think the House bill too, there's a nudge in there to make sure to nudge the FTA to not only fully fund existing federal funds grant agreements, but also to fund new projects that meet the FTA criteria. So I think that's correct, Steve. That's important too.
Yeah, you know, and they've grown tired of the fact that DOT has been slow in issuing grants. So they have put some deadlines to try to get DOT to issue these capital investment grants before, you know, too much time passes by. So that's good news for us as well.
Excellent. And you'll keep us posted on all of that, right?
Absolutely, yes.
The other thing, Steve, maybe you can give them an update on the FTA administrator, what's going on with her nomination.
Well, unfortunately not much, because Thelma Drake was nominated by the President, and the Senate Banking Committee held a hearing, and they reported out her nomination. The only person who opposed her was Senator Robert Menendez from New Jersey. But what's important about it is that two things to mention. One of them is the Senate Democrats are slowing down all nominations on the Senate floor. And this one particularly probably will even go slower because with Chuck Schumer being the Senate Democratic leader and the fact that the administration is fighting with New York and New Jersey over whether or not to fund the Gateway project, which is the new tunnel into New York City. And that would be through the Capital Investment Grant Program. There is the likelihood that her nomination will not happen, probably maybe by August at the earliest, is my guess.
Okay, well, what does that mean for us here in terms of getting our hands on the money from BRT Central Line?
What it means is that Jane Williams, who you met with earlier this year in March, is going to be the acting administrator. There's no problem in terms of the project moving ahead in terms of the review process. With or without the administrator, that process will continue. So it really doesn't have any direct impact. It just means that they're waiting to have their leadership still put in place.
All right, well, she seems to be doing a pretty good job supporting us. We had a chance to revisit our relationship over in Tampa when she was down here, so that was good.
Yeah.
She remembered us too, which was even better.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, this is Brad. So Harry and Steve, I know that when the 18 budget was finally approved and signed into law by the president, then he squawked a lot about that he would never do that again. So is there an understanding that the House and Senate moving so quickly on appropriating the 19 budget items that the president will go ahead and sign it and just complain on Twitter, or what?
Well, I'll jump in. I'll start and then let Harry jump in. The plan that Congress seems to be following is to package up. So there are 12 different appropriations bills, and the plan seems to be to package up 3 or 4 in what they're calling mini buses rather than an omnibus. The House is going to try to take the first one up next week, and the second mini bus will include transportation, we understand. So the goal is that they're going to try to get sent to the White House these packages of 3 different or 4 different packages of appropriations bills. Hopefully the president will sign them into law. There has been no indication yet from the White House whether they will or won't. But at least Congress is trying to push them through as quickly as possible. And the fact that the Senate Majority Leader yesterday announced that he's canceling most of the August recess means they're probably going to spend more time working on trying to get these appropriations bills to the president before the September 30th deadline.
And the only thing I would add on that, Brad, is the president had talked about when he was first sworn into office doing an infrastructure bill, and that obviously is not going to happen in this session of Congress, but they're advertising these appropriations bills as being sort of a down payment on the infrastructure program. So he hasn't really squawked about, I don't think, the transportation funding so much, or some other programs in other bills he was more concerned about. The other thing you may have heard about was the president had proposed earlier this year trying to do some kind of a rescissions package where they would go back and try and reclaim some of the excess spending that Congress provided in the omnibus appropriations bill. And to this point, they really haven't advanced that plan. The only thing the White House has sent up so far was a package to try and reclaim some unspent money that goes back a number of years on a variety of projects, including transportation projects they go back, I think, some funding goes back 10 to 12 years that had never gotten, on projects that never got started. So he hasn't shown at this point an interest in trying to go back and clip some of the money that Congress provided for transportation programs in the omnibus. So that's a good sign too. So, fingers crossed, and we'll see what happens.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you very much. And where did Ron go? Ron, do you want to do the state?
Yeah, the good news is there's not much to report right now. I mean, everybody's kind of in election mode, and we were kind of mentioning earlier that Tampa Bay is kind of the epicenter right now for the world of politics, with all of the statewide candidates and paying a lot of attention to in Tampa Bay and the I-4 corridor. So, I know we're going to talk about T-BARTA and some of the funding issues there. One thing I will mention that we probably need to keep an eye on is there seems to be getting some momentum across the Bay in Hillsborough to potentially try to get a referendum on the ballot in 2018 for a half a penny for transportation. That's still kind of in the works. Kevin Thurman is the person that's pushing that, and the idea would be is not to go to the county commission to get it on the ballot, but to do it by signatures, and they don't have a lot of time to do that. And so, if you're looking from a time frame standpoint, it is possible. They would include about 6 projects as a part of that. Those are still kind of being flushed out, and so I think we'll know more details in the next couple of weeks if that's going to move forward. If it is going to move forward, I'll make sure we'll get an update that you can send out to the entire committee.
Excellent. I do know that they, since we last met, that the State Commission for Transportation Disadvantaged met and approved of PSTA receiving basically a 3rd year of funding for our TD Late Shift Mobility Enhancement Grant, MEG grant. I guess what I heard was at the TD Commission board meeting where they approved it, they expressed a strong desire to limit any individual transit agency from getting any more than 3 years of funding, which is a little worrisome. I don't know what that means. If they continue to provide the MEG grants in the future, so far they've never been able to allocate all of the funding that the legislature has approved for it because pretty much PSTA and now about 2 other transit systems are doing anything. And I don't know if that's going to change in the future, but I don't know if they're just going to keep the money and not give the money out or exactly. But I think it's something to talk to them more about and see if we need to maybe, I don't know.
We'll reach out and try to get some clarity because I know I've heard some conversations around 3 years. Is it consecutive? What's the is it supposed to be a break? Is there like a year break? So let me do some follow-up on that and I'll get you a report.
And that's going to continue to be an issue, as we've talked about. The last couple of years, what they've done on transportation disadvantage funding is it's all through proviso. So it's not like they're setting anything in stone. So, I mean, the last 2 years, they've just done it through proviso, so we'll have to go back and kind of continue to work on that formula. Basically, what they did last year was just take what they did the previous year and, kind of rolled it over into this year's budget, so.
Yeah. And then what I heard was it wasn't that they didn't take a vote on that.
Discussion, this is the sentiment.
Discussion, and individual board members wanted to spread the money around, I guess.
But to whom?
Yeah.
To your point, there's not a lot of folks seeking those dollars or in a position to seek those dollars, so,
Well, and the good news is we're well positioned for the next 4 years. We've got some key leadership coming out of the Bay Area that will make sure that hopefully we'll get our appropriate share of dollars, so.
But I think that's a great point you're bringing up, Brad, because when we were up there, we heard that same sort of feeling in what you just said as well. But I think we ought to stay on top of that because they're pleased with our program, but we want to make sure that some cog in the wheel doesn't stop it. But I appreciate your comment as well. So.
We don't want Patty to have to, go off the rails on this. So. We'll take care of that for her.
I cannot understand is, the whole state world as I know it in Florida revolves around the fiscal year, which starts on July 1. The legislature meets in the spring, and then FDOT says all the time, well, they don't get any of the money until July 1, and then you really can't get your grant until like August or maybe even early September. But somehow, the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage operates in its own little world where they have already met, already allocated the money that the legislature approved for them, and the grant, I think the paperwork has already gotten to Debbie.
Yes.
And it's early June, before the year has even started. How does that, I don't know.
Maybe it's to our advantage because we've been in front of it all the time.
Well, it's been to our advantage, but I just don't. I don't know.
So while Ron, and before Brad starts with his presentation, could you, I don't know, when's our next legislative committee meeting?
1 August.
Brad?
August
1st?
Yeah.
Thank you. So can you, when you come on August 1st, can you give us a timeline of when we need to have our legislative package completed, when we need to?
Yeah, we actually
I
have
think that would be
time
very-
set, I think, with Brad and Cassandra both to talk about that, so we'll be prepared.
That would be good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
a comment was made about Hillsborough doing this half of a penny. How does that affect how we're thinking here on the legislative committee?
Good question.
Well, it probably doesn't directly, but indirectly, it's probably not a bad thing. If Hillsborough tries to move forward and is successful, the regional plan that's out there right now, this 41-mile BRT, which is probably going to change, by the way, at some level. Having a regional plan is great, but if you don't have local plans that feed into that, so like that's why Central Avenue BRT, that's why that's so popular right now, is because that feeds into a regional system. That's why people care about the extension of the streetcar in downtown Tampa, because again, that would feed into more of a regional system. So the good news is that Hillsborough got it on the ballot, which is a heavy lift. Polling seems to show that it could pass. Let's assume it passed. What that would allow potentially is for some of these local projects to get funded, which I think would give momentum to a regional system. So that would be good, very good for us.
So the article in the paper today, I didn't read it because I had to go to Rotary, but it was about that issue. The leaders were meeting. Our business leaders were, I guess, had a meeting, and they said we're
The
lagging.
mayors.
Thank you. Yeah. We're lagging in transportation. So here's a step that goes, I guess, that way, because what's the main issue? I mean, our funding is, well, we're stuck, right? I mean, not stuck, but we have to continue the search for any grant or any of these monies that are out there for providing transportation. But meanwhile, we're not providing the full breadth of transportation that we would if we had the funding.
Well, and Commissioner Long and I've had this conversation before, is if you look at overall funding, especially from transit funding for projects, Tampa Bay is obviously lagging far behind the rest of the state. I mean, Jacksonville, the money they've received over the years, Orlando, South Florida, obviously. One of the main reasons being is we've never had a plan. We've had all these kind of individual projects, but we've never had a regional plan that we could point to and try to get the business community and the regional elected officials to kind of rally around and be able to support. A regional system will then hopefully support some of these local projects as well that we're trying to get out of the ground. But it's going to take some political will to get it to the finish line, because as you're seeing right now in the regional plan, I mean, there seems to be a lot of agreement in in Pinellas County. There seems to be a lot of agreement up in Pasco County, and then right now in Hillsborough County, there still seems to be some distractors there of trying to figure out what they want to do and who's going to pay for it, what does operating look like, and we're trying to get them, some of the folks onto the right path, but it's taking some time to do that.
And to that point, I'm curious about how the Cutter, their desire to have a peer review, and Cutter is beginning to work on that. How would that fit in with the initiative to do the penny or half penny or whatever it is?
So those are not connected at all, because if they're going to try to do the half penny, it's not going to go through the county commission. The groups that's pushing that would try to do it through petition. What Hillsborough County,
but then if pretend that it works, who's the money going to go to?
It's going to go to Hillsborough County. But the regional system is not included as a part of the 6 projects that would be potentially paid for. They're trying to make it flexible enough where they could use some of those dollars for operations, and I'm not sure if they're going to end up, if they can quite get there. But one of the things that some folks are pushing for is saying, look, if you don't want to spend dollars on the actual project, because most people believe you can get enough money from the federal government and the state to try to get the infrastructure. The question still continues to be is who's going to pay for it. If you could use a portion of that referendum for operation of projects, I think that's kind of still up in the air, still being discussed. To your point, though, the question of, so Hillsborough County right now, the commission's asking Cutter to go in and kind of do an independent review, kind of a regional standpoint of the project. The good news is we've talked to a lot of the county commissioners privately, and I think there is support for the regional system from a majority of the county commissioners right now.
And you and I both know that what they say privately and what they say when they're together are...
That's That's as of 9/22 on Wednesday, June 6th. That might have already changed.
Thank
but-
you. All right, yes.
Man, I don't want to be overburdening on this, but you said they had selected already 6 identified
One-
projects.
And they is one group. It's Kevin Thurman and a kind of a coalition of community transit leaders that are kind of the ones that are kind of pushing that.
In a regional plan, the 41 mile is not included in that,
It is
except
not.
as you were pointing out, some
Maybe,
operational.
and that's a big maybe. They're trying, there's key folks are trying to see if they can make sure one of the challenges with doing ballot language, we learned this in 2010 and we learned it in 2014 as well. When you're doing ballot language for a transportation initiative, you either draft it to where it's too tight, which ties your hands on how the dollars can be spent. You can also develop it where it's too loose, and then voters kind of feel uncomfortable voting for it because where the dollar's going to go. So you're trying to land somewhere in the middle of that, and this is a big if. I mean, this is not set in stone. I mean, if you're going to try to get it on the ballot, you've got to get signatures basically in 60 days to get it on the ballot. It's a lot of signatures to be able to collect. You have to have somebody out there that's willing to raise a lot of money to be able to go get the signatures to get them on the ballot. Then you have to raise money on top of that to be able to go basically develop a campaign around the referendum as well. So
And let's keep in mind that the bandwidth right now of our communities, with the amount of ballot initiatives that are going to be there in November, not to mention how many races and how many candidates are going to be on those ballots, you know, it's not an opportune, ideal time to be trying to put something that's this complex this quickly out there. So they're going to have some challenges to.
The ballot is 4 pages already.
and people are telling us, and Archie, I'm not sure what you're hearing, but I read an article last week that the ballot as written today, without nothing else added to it, if an average citizen just goes in and starts the ballot and has to read, if they're not prepared for the 13 constitutional amendments, it's going to take the average voter between 15 and 20 minutes to complete a ballot.
And most folks, historically, but when there's all that on the ballot, they just go right down and vote no on everything, which I am very hopeful for.
So we'll know a lot more on the potential referendum in the next couple of weeks. We'll make sure that Brad's updated, and we'll be prepared to, if it does move forward, again, it's the big if, at our August legislative committee meeting, we'll make sure there's an agenda item to give you more details on it.
Yeah, and since this is not on our agenda anyway, can we just get back to the program here?
Yeah.
Now,
But I will just say, as Commissioner Twonga knows, who, by sitting on the TMA, one opportunity, even if the referendum doesn't actually happen in Hillsborough, but just for now, is, as you know, the Hillsborough commissioners have been vocally sort of opposed somewhat to the 41-mile regional plan because they feel like that takes away from their ability to focus on their own Hillsborough-centric plans. So this initiative to raise money in Hillsborough might appease them somewhat and lessen their negativity toward the regional plan. Maybe, you know.
And just one last comment then, and so as I'm watching this only at 10,000 feet, there's actually only been one commission that's come in just recently that really threw this that way.
Yeah.
And the others have been, in my opinion, rather flexible still.
And
That's
Ron
my-
says as of 9/22, they were they were supportive.
all right, can we get back on
9/26.
this, please? Time is passing. And to that
Okay.
slide, since this is the first time I've seen that, I think after that first bullet, you need to put another bullet in there that reflects that in 17,
It changed.
there was a new reinvented T-BARTA. It's not the same agency
Yeah.
as it was in 2007 to 13, and that slide makes it look like it is.
Okay.
Right? Does everyone agree?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
So this is a presentation that Debbie and I will be giving to the T-BARTA board on Friday when it meets over in Tampa. So you are our guinea pig audience to provide input, just like Commissioner Long just provided, about what more we might want to add or subtract. But just a
Madam Chair, I was not able to pull that up on my,
It's not on there.
It's not
This is
here,
the
just
first
so you
time
know
I'm seeing
that.
it, and they don't have paper
It's
copies.
on there.
we couldn't pull it up. I couldn't pull it up last night, couldn't pull it up this morning.
Yeah, it's not
Just-
on.
I just want you to know that, I'm not complaining about that, I'm just
Okay.
saying, so as you go through this,
we'll figure
we're
out the
seeing it for the
technical
first
problem.
I
time.
am too.
Did you see it?
I think it was.
Just so you know that, just to be helpful. Thank
Okay.
you, Madam Chair.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a 90%. So, as we all know, I think everyone in this room pretty much knows, there's a lot of debate right now about this idea of a regional transportation system. There's the TMA, which meets more frequently lately, which is an MPO creation. There's 3 MPOs, the TMA meets, which is supposedly the MPOs coming together. There's a study going on about possibly consolidating the MPOs, and there's a whole world of MPO. Then there's T-BARTA, and T-BARTA has existed separate from the MPOs, but has been very similar in that it has completed a master plan for the region for many years. That's in their state enabling legislation. They had to complete a plan. They have representatives from mayors and county commissioners from around the region, very similar to the TMA. And there's a lot of debate. Well, which of the two is going to take the lead? The legislature specifically named T-BARTA as the one that would implement this any regional transit system. The problem with T-BARTA is that they basically have no money, and they have very limited staff. They only really have 4 employees. We're not exactly sure how much money they have, but they have very limited money. And this has kind of come to a head. As Commissioner Long mentioned, the legislature approved some fanfare. It was actually in 2017, they approved a slight change in the makeup of the T-BARTA board that tried to focus them a little bit more on transit, and but gave them no money. I think it lopped off one county. Hernando County is no longer in it. No, Citrus County is no longer in it. And then in 2018, the legislature approved $1 million allocated to T-BARTA for funding of T-BARTA, some funding of T-BARTA operations, and then to conduct their master plan for the region. A regional transit development plan, TDP, in theory. In addition, FDOT has programmed $5 million to advance the 41-mile regional premium BRT plan. If the region can come together, which at the last TMA meeting it looked like that may not happen, but FDOT, at least as of last week, was still optimistic and on board with providing $5 million to T-BARTA to advance the regional plan. So Commissioner Long, and as her role as a T-BARTA board member, as well as the chair of T-BARTA, which is a governor appointee, James Holton, who's a Pinellas County resident and developer, he is the chair. Over the last several meetings, they have been working to get T-BARTA ready to take on this leadership role on this premium plan. To their credit, they are looking to hire a new executive director. Ray Shermonti is retiring, and trying to hire a new executive director, trying to set up a new, more robust or more solid T-BARTA organization to implement this plan. One of the keys to that, obviously, is having a solid financial foundation. having them come to every meeting and say, well, we have no money, we cannot do anything, we can hardly even make our payroll, is a problem. If we're going to entrust them with implementing this plan successfully. So over the last 6 to 8 weeks, Debbie Elias, our CFO, and our grants management staff have been working with TBARDA staff, limited staff, and trying to investigate exactly what is their financial situation. Why are they squawking about not having any money? How much money do they need? I think all this, with the idea that to try to set them up to have a solid foundation, and then hire a really rock star executive director that we can pay. So this presentation really is only focused on the finances of TBARDA and what we investigated and what we recommend for the future for TBARDA. I do agree, and I have been thinking last night that we do need another slide that kind of gives a little bit more background on sort of the history of what TBARDA is and how it fits into the region, and why this is an important initiative to help them find a better financial solution. I think this number is not exactly right, but it might be.
Close.
Debbie has been spending time at home on the weekends, I heard, trying to analyze some of the financial documentation from TBARDA, and we believe that right now that they have approximately a $2.4 million annual budget. That pays for their some consulting work, that pays for their rent in West Shore, and it pays for approximately four to six employees. They do one operating thing. They oversee the region's van pool system. They have a contract with Enterprise Rent-A-Car Company, and Enterprise has vans, and TBARDA has a ride matching software, so you can call the number that you see on the side of the most highways, and that goes into TBARDA, and you say, I live in Pinellas and I want to go to Tampa, and if you don't want to take the bus, then you can be signed up to ride a van. There's really not that many that are coming from Pinellas County. It's mostly Pasco County to downtown Tampa. So lots of people in Pasco are getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they're going and meeting their van and taking a van of 6 to 8 people down into Tampa. Enterprise provides the van, the driver gets to ride for free, the passengers pay, and it pretty much breaks even. Those miles count as public transit miles in the federal formula, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. Despite the legislative changes between the creation of TBARDA in 2006 and about 2013, TBARDA received no federal funding. They were 100% funded by the state DOT. Different grants of different sizes and shapes, but almost all of their money came from the state. Then their former executive director called me up one day, this is early when I first got to PSTA, and said, hey, we run this van pool program, we generate miles that go into the formula, could we get credit for those federal dollars to flow back to TBARDA? I worked with Bob Clifford at the time, and we made that happen in 2013. Starting in 2013, TBARDA started being allocated federal formula grants. This, $600,000 to $800,000 a year. Every year, as long as they keep running the van pools, they get $600,000 to $800,000 a year in formula. They also, starting in 2013, got a fairly substantial discretionary federal grant called One Call, One Click. But that's a one-time source of funding. The problem was TBARTA couldn't get access to those funds. TBARTA never could get access to the formula funds. And they had a lot of problems spending the discretionary ones. Why? Lots of different reasons. One key reason is, again, TBARTA is too small. They don't have any accountants on staff. They have planners on staff. And they've been always focused on planning, contracting out most of the major work to consultants. Without without the sort of infrastructure to manage these grants, not only have they struggled to spend, they haven't spent any of the federal funds, they've had difficulty even spending the state funds that they receive. And we believe that they are short or they have delayed payments to vendors and other kinds of real challenges that they've had. Like I said, Commissioner Long and James Holton and other board members wanted more of an understanding and review of how TBARTA could be set up, so PSTA launched an investigation, thanks to a great work by Debbie and her team. In May, last month, the TBARTA board met and approved of of developing an MOU that would have PSTA help TBARTA with its federal grant management. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. This is what the MOU called for. PSTA, with its team, would close out open FTA grants. We would apply for the new grants that TBARTA had never applied for. We would conduct, like we've already done now with the federal grants, we would conduct a state grant review. And then perhaps even come up with a budget plan for TBARTA's future. Task number 1, which is basically already almost complete. Closing out existing federal grants. 2 small grants of $36,000. PSTA has been working with Forward Pinellas, who has helped thus far with administering this grant in closing out these grants and getting access to the remaining $36,000 in those grants, and that will go right to TBARTA to support their staff expenses. $584,000, again, in that discretionary one call, one click grant is in jeopardy of being lost to the region if it's not spent quickly. PSTA and Forward Pinellas staff have done a great job in getting those funds identified that they can be spent on our Flamingo project, our Flamingo Regional Fair project, and so PSTA and HART will be using those funds, and then that frees up $584,000 of our capital funds for other projects. And that is in concert with originally what the grant was intended to do, provide a regional transit fare payment system. So it fits right into it fairly nicely. All this is on pace to happen this summer. And that's a great news. Because like PSTA, Forward Pinellas has a triennial review coming up this summer where the auditors from the federal government, our friendly auditors, come and are going to give us basically a root canal of checking all of our grants and our compliance and everything like that. And that would be the time in which, if no movement was being made on this, they would probably recommend taking this money away from the region. The bigger nut is the formula grants. The formula grants, like I said, are allocated to TBARTA every year between between $600,000 and $800,000. But so far, TBARTA has never applied for any of that money. It's just sitting there in the federal government's coffers, earmarked in the TBARTA account, so it's not in jeopardy of being lost, but this is money that can clearly be used to provide T-BARTA with some solid, a much better financial foundation. So Debbie and her team have been working very hard with our friends at FTA on how to access these funds, how to and how to set them up so that they can be used to support T-BARTA. So when we wrote the MOU and when the T-BARTA board saw this last month, it was $3 million, but as Harry and Steve tell us from the feds, Congress approved a new budget and just like a week ago, and so another 598,000 just got added to the account. So now it's $3.6 million. PSTA will make an application on behalf of T-BARTA for that this summer, and it will be available then to be spent on T-BARTA expenses. One key factor that I've been working with Secretary Gwynn and FDOT on is, of course, FDOT provides a whole bunch of grants to T-BARTA, and they are very interested in making sure that there's no what they call double dipping, where we bill the same expense that FDOT is paying for to the feds. Of course, we don't want to do that either. We have to, it's complex. We don't have it totally worked out yet, but we want to make sure that it's clear. The expenses in the T-BARTA operational budget that are billed to the federal government are over here, and then the expenses that are billed to the state grants and all of their rules and regulations are separate from that. So there's no question about how the finances of T-BARTA are working. So a question which I think I'm assuming I might get from folks that are not from Pinellas County at the T-BARTA meeting or others is, why should PSTA be doing this? PSTA, like HART, is what is called a designated recipient of FTA formula funds. We get about $12 to $13 million a year. Just like T-BARTA gets 600,000, we get about 13 million. HART gets about the same, and PASCO is another designated recipient. T-BARTA is not a designated recipient.
Brad, without interrupting your train of thought, I think it would be worth somehow putting in this slide that PSTA already has a memorandum of understanding with HART and has been working with HART for 2 years on procurement, on maintenance, sharing of maintenance, and there was one other thing which...
Risk management.
Risk management. And so we have the experience of providing assistance to other quasi-governmental agencies, number one, and number two, HART is not in a position right now to even get themselves out of hot water, let alone try to provide assistance to T-BARTA. They've lost their finance person, correct?
That's right, that's right. I forgot about that.
So I mean, you don't have to put it in the slide, but you need to make yourself a mental note to point that out, because I think that will take the steam out of why PSTA and not HART, and not HART, or, you know, whatever. Okay, that's it. Go ahead.
The longer term question is, what is the future of T-BARTA? T-BARTA historically has been a planning organization. The finances and accounting are really being done by their administrative assistant. A pretty basic system. PSTA, of course, under Debbie's leadership, has experienced FTA grant management staff with years of experience and very good relationships with, and lots of experience dealing with all of the minutia of all of this federal grant management. This is a picture with Commissioner Long, and when the last time we were at FTA in Washington, D.C. with Jane Williams there. But we also have a very good relationship, of course, with the regional office that deals with a lot of these funding stuff in Atlanta. And related to T-BARTA, Debbie's staff has been on the phone almost every single day with the Atlanta FTA staff on how to get this funding available to T-BARTA. The faster the PSTA can get these funds, the quicker T-BARTA is stabilized. The T-BARTA board, as of yesterday, I understood, was looking to create a search committee and start get candidates and try to move quickly forward with hiring an executive director. So to the extent that we can get these funds available, and I think we can get a better candidate, obviously, for that position, if the candidates see that there's funding available. This review of just the federal grants piece has raised a number of other questions. So certain things are already happening that I'm going to show on this slide, and then the next slide is stuff that has not happened yet but could happen in the future. Like I mentioned, Debbie is now working hard to better understand the whole T-BARTA budget and help us develop a budget for the future of T-BARTA with these federal funds and with the state funds identified, how it might map out. PSTA is working with T-BARTA that they can become, sometime in the future, their own direct recipient of federal funds. But that's going to take some time. There's been a lot of debate with the T-BARTA staff about how fast that can be done. Right now they have four employees. Seems like they don't have enough employees or any financially oriented employees right now. I think even if they submit the paperwork to FTA, what we are understanding is it will take FTA probably into next year before they can be approved to be a federal direct recipient. And quite frankly, in my opinion, it's an open question of whether they should, whether that's important for them or a worthwhile expenditure to ramp them up to be equipped. Perhaps they could continually just contract this through PSTA. T-BARTA board also approved a task with their auditor, Clifton Larson Allen, their auditor, to do what they called a forensic audit. This was, I think, an intent to try to get to the bottom of this financial picture and to make recommendations to the T-BARTA board on how to shore up or better understand the funding problems of T-BARTA. Luckily, Clifton Larson Allen is also PSTA's auditor. So Debbie is, of course, constantly dealing with them on our own audit. So she's had conversations with them already about how, and to try to coordinate that work so that Clifton Larson Allen can come back with some tangible recommendations on how T-BARTA should move forward in an appropriate way, how they should set up their financial systems in a way that we can better track their federal expenditures, their state expenditures, etc. So I think that's a really good step, is to have Clifton Larson Allen help us in setting them up. Sort of gives the structure a better, makes me sleep at night. So these tasks on this final slide have not happened yet, but are possible additional tasks. Secretary Gwynn, when I talked to him on the phone and told him what we were doing on the federal piece, he asked if PSTA could do the same thing on the state piece, because he was telling me about all the challenges that they had with the state grants and all of all of the ways that they're being handled at T-BARDA. So Debbie's started working on trying to understand their state grants.
Brad, how many more slides are there here?
This is the last slide.
Okay, so I've already read that. Can we kind of bring this to a close, because I want to leave time for questions and also for input on how this is presented to the Finance Committee on Friday. So is everybody with me, and you've read the last three of them? I do think that in the long-term financial management piece, clearly we have the wrong people in the wrong seats on the wrong bus within T-BARDA. And we as a board, we as a PSTA board, I mean, I don't think we should lose track of what our mission is. And I would like to suggest that PSTA really focus on that last bullet point, and we'll need buy-in from the T-BARDA board to go out immediately on an RFP to recruit a program administrator. I believe that the state wants to see that happen. I'm pretty sure that that would be in the best interest of PSTA. And as long as we have our eye on the financial piece of it to ensure I's are dotted and T's are crossed, I think we'll be in a better position when the new executive director comes on board, that he can really hit the ground running. Because right now, T-BARDA is a shell. Yes, there's 4 bodies over there, but they're the wrong people, clearly, or we wouldn't be where we are right now. And I know that sounds a little harsh, but somebody's got to tell it like it is. This is totally unacceptable, what's going on right here.
I agree.
Do you agree?
Yes.
Do you agree, John?
I agree.
Highly.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we're elected
Tomorrow.
officials here.
Tomorrow.
We cannot sit here and not, you know, move forward with a real solid, how do we straighten the ship, and in a very short time frame. Debbie,
I agree.
you agree? Brad, do you agree?
I do agree.
Okay.
I do agree.
Charlie, are you there?
I'm still here.
Do you agree with us? Do you have questions?
Well, I did have a question, yes.
Okay.
Maybe I missed it at the beginning. Was this a request from T-BARDA staff to PSTA?
Yes.
And then is there a percentage or standard administrative fee that PSTA would collect from any kind of grants that they receive?
Well, I'll let Debbie answer that question, but built into the proposal that PSTA brought to the Finance Committee of T-BARDA last month, and we approved it at the board, the expenses that are being incurred by PSTA will be billed to these grants.
Correct.
To reimburse us for the effort that we're putting out. And it'll be the grants that will cover the expense of the program administrator as well, correct?
Right, there's a variety of grants.
Can you hear her, Charlie?
Just barely.
Speak up,
Okay.
Debbie, please.
Yeah, so we will be charging a fee. What I'm working on right now is there's the federal funding sources, the state funding sources, et cetera, and outlining how each of those funding sources will apply to each expense category. Because what really got them into this situation is after the 2013 federal grant, even though the monies from the FTA were available, they couldn't access them, as Brad had mentioned. So they started using the state money for that program, which took away money for all of the normal operating needs. That got them to where they are. So we will be able to do that. We'll be able to charge things, make it very transparent as to what's funding what, so that FDOT feels very secure in that, as well as FTA. And they also get funding, as I was learning the other night, from the Hillsborough MPO to the tune of about $100,000, as well as about $200,000 from I'll say, program contributors.
So, to that point, I think it's important to point out that the senior management at FDOT and the folks that we deal with at the federal level really have a great regard for PSTA and the way we run our operation, and they are very comfortable with what we are doing, correct, Brad?
Correct.
Brad spent an inordinate amount of time dotting the i's and crossing the t's with the people at the state and with the people at the feds to ensure that everybody is on the same page. He's also had many, many conversations with WIT because we needed to get permission from Forward Pinellas in order to pull this money down right away because we had waited so long to apply for it.
Right.
Again, it's about leadership and the correct amount of knowledge to know what it is you're supposed to be doing as the executive director of T-BARTA. And the person that's sitting in that seat is a planner. It's not his fault that he doesn't know, but none of them don't know what they don't know. It's sad. Ron?
Oh, just
Oh,
real
Lisa.
quick, Brad, so when you present, and then are you going to make recommendations that they hire, like an accountant or?
Well, so I mentioned that the T-BARTA board authorized their legal counsel to develop an MOU that would come to the PSTA board too for approval, that would list all of the things that the T-BARTA board and staff are hiring PSTA to do for them. And in that agreement, there is this provision that PSTA would be the grants manager for T-BARTA, but PSTA's expenses in doing that function would come off the top. We would basically pay ourselves in a compliant way from the federal grants, because one of the eligible expenses allowed under the federal grants is grant administration. And so we would do the grant administration for T-BARTA. We have tentatively set in our budget to hire one additional accountant. I don't think it will be like that person will be the T-BARTA accountant, but we will set up our whole billing system like we already have in place now, that T-BARTA related activities that our accountants do get allocated to the grants, and that then we can administer that FTA federal grant at this point. Maybe same thing in the future on the state DOT side.
Okay, thank you.
Ron?
Two quick points. Number one, and I think a great way to kind of frame this to kind of people outside of the T-BARTA and PSTA world is, this is a short-term solution to make sure that
Right.
somebody's from a financial standpoint is handling it. Then once a new CEO is in place, or executive director, whatever we're going to call them, they will have the ability to kind of build their own team of however they want from a finance and accounting department standpoint. But this will at least get T-BARTA in a position where it's 12 months, 18 months, whatever it may be, and it could be longer than that, but at least in the short term to get the dollars they need to. I do have a quick question. Debbie keeps alluding to she's kind of like learning things about their budget. Can we not just request what their budget is, like for the last 5 years, and see what the income?
I have all that. That's
The problem is it's not really real.
Right, and and that's a big concern. So if we're kind of
Yeah.
piecing together like NPOs are giving money and.
Right, I've been given a budget to look at and go through, and what is not transparent to me anyway, I'll put it that way, is how each of those line items are funded. That's what I'm kind of looking at now. And when you look at all of their grants, they cover a multitude of the same areas. So you want to use it most appropriately, easily, so that you're not picking here, here, and here.
So to the point that Debbie just made, since I was appointed to the Finance Committee back in January, I have been asking for a document that showed me exactly what you just spoke to, and it is now June, and I still don't have it. And it should be able to be given to me overnight. I mean, this is not huge scientific thing I'm asking for. This is a document that they should have been able to access immediately and get it right over to me. So that's what started raising the red flags that, oh, I really need to get more involved in this, because as you all know, we on the county commission have been dealing with another one of our groups that has had some very squirrely things going on. And I did not want to be on the receiving end of one of those articles from Mark Fuente. Thank you very much.
We don't.
So, yes.
And I'm fully supportive from the standpoint of our relationship with the premium transit, with FDOT. So like tomorrow, we should.
Yes,
we should
tomorrow.
Thank you.
I would just one other comment to kind of to Commissioner Justice's question. Both Debbie and I in our past lives have experiences similar to what we're proposing here, where one entity provides some kind of service for another entity, and that's actually even done here in the Tampa Bay for, I think, still currently, the Hillsborough MPO employees are actually Hillsborough County employees. And a lot of the accounting and management of the Hillsborough MPO is actually done by Hillsborough County. And I think that used to be, or maybe even still, is kind of a similar relationship between the Pinellas MPO and Pinellas County, where they share some services back and forth. I think Debbie can describe in Buffalo, the transit agency had the MPO and provided services to the MPOs kind of under that. Where I worked up in Northern Virginia, I worked for an agency that ran a commuter rail operation, but then as the commuter rail grew, they got their own separate staff, they had their own separate board, they had their own separate executive director, but they were always, their accounting and their payroll and everything was done through the umbrella organization, the other organization. So this happens all over the place, and I think this will really set us up successfully.
So, are there any other questions or any other business that we need to talk about, Brad? Thank you very much for doing that. And we're going to meet here for a few minutes after the meeting. Ron, Brad, and I guess you're welcome to stay if you want. Do we have any other business, John?
No, I was just curious as with what's going on with all of the legislation right now. Are there any points, I just wanted to ask those folks.
He's coming to talk to us about
Okay.
it.
And the good news is, with it being an election year, committee weeks won't really start until January. So we just need to have something teed up probably around the election time, so we've got plenty of time. So like last year, where they were starting session in January, committee weeks were starting in September. This year with a little bit longer runway to prepare for session.
And I asked in part because I'm currently still on the Florida League of Cities, the transportation side.
Excellent.
And they're asking, do I want to continue with that in that function and structure? And they're talking about some of the complexities right now. So I thought I would just bring that up to make us aware. So thank you. You're already doing that.
You're welcome. Lisa?
Nope,
You have
I'm
any?
good.
You're good.
Thank you. And you explain a lot when you talk, so.
So then, if there's, Charlie, do you have anything new you would like to talk about?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Harry, are you still there?
I am. The only thing we forgot to mention in our update, and Brad and Debbie can talk about this, is I'm sure you saw the notice that the PSTA received $80,000 in storm-related funding to help out. So I think I've already saw a clip in the paper about that, but
Yeah.
I think Debbie's already working on that.
Excellent. We love getting that money in.
Yeah. Too bad we applied for 200.
Steve, do you have anything?
Yes.
No, I don't. Sure, thank you.
Listen, I'm so grateful that you all hung in through that very lengthy presentation. Thank you very much. And without further ado, if there's no other business, then we are adjourned. All right?
Thank you.
I don't have a
Thank
gavel,
you.
so we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Are we off the air now?
Not yet, I'm sure it takes them a couple minutes,
Oh, okay, well,
so I would wait a couple minutes if you.
all right. Well,
There's a Barracuda message, can I delete it?
You can delete it. I got it.
Well,
I'm setting up an interview with Elodie with the Times
At the board meeting
because
on-
they can't come, but I'm trying to get that scheduled. hate the Barracuda encryption. Oh, such a pain.
Well, we kind of talked about
Until-
meetings, more up on this is out there.
Week after.
So once we
Fourth
come
of
up
July.
with.
Okay, that's
Because
right.
the council is on
We need to find out.
Okay.
I would
we have
leave
a
this
better
answer
answer
for
for
her.
Are you, I gotta look and see if you're on.
I don't know if he's actually right there.
Yeah.
Or if he's timing in
Right,
and
yeah.
then goes off and does something, 'cause
Get a better idea.
Starts from Largo to the airport.